Hello everyone.
Hello.
Hope you're comfortable because we're about to talk about epic rides now on stage here at the theatre at Rouleur. So we want to welcome organisers of Transcontinental, David, please join us, and Karen as well, who rode Transcontinental in 2017. As well, organiser from Badlands, please join us, please. And Liam, who rode most of these epic rides, and he's been inspired, obviously, by all these rides. And the previous graphics were wrong. It was showing yesterday's talk. Okay, quite good. Anyway, we had a chat yesterday as well last night with Taylor Finney, who was just displayed on graphic before, and Badlands organisers. But today, obviously, still a similar talk, epic rides, and especially how Transcontinental started, and obviously with Michael's vision of modern bikepacking, and how much has it evolved since the beginning until now?
Yeah, that's a nice big question to get us going. So Mike had the idea for the Transcontinental while he was doing the Round the World ride in 2012, which he did in 92 days. But he did the first section, which was from London to Istanbul, and it was his idea that that could be an accessible version of the adventure that he'd had doing that race. So the idea that you could have something about 2 weeks long, but still have sufficient challenge and like opportunities for finding out more about yourself and like what you're capable of, and connecting with nature and the world around you in that kind of more condensed time, so that if people had an ordinary day job, they could still go out and do that sort of stuff. So 2013, the race was run for the first time, and it's just grown and grown from that point on, really. So we just had the 8th edition, we're in our 10th year, so and already planning for next year as well.
And I understand that you have to limit a bit this participation because it's growing so much. And how hard is it to put a limit on people who can actually?
Yeah, we do. We're hugely oversubscribed every year, so we have about 1,000 applications at least. We have 300 places available on the race, and we're trying to make it a more like diverse and inclusive race at the same time. So like really having to think carefully about like who we invite onto the races from those applications. But we've had to run a ballot system for the past few years as well to try and make it as fair as possible. So there's always quite a few disappointed people. We say that for every person that's on the race, they're taking the place of 2 others. So the sense of responsibility that when you get there, you ride in the spirit of equality and equal opportunity is really important to us as well.
And at the same time, it's inspiring other events like Badlands and Liam, you were just telling me you're organising your own event as well. How much importance, especially Transcontinental race, has to put onto all the events happening with the same spirit?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think like the inspiration comes from TCR. I think a lot of organisers of ultra events, it was the first, it was the reference. Yeah, I mean, let's face it, it's moved us in that direction. We've all inspired, perhaps we've been participants, or we've come from that background or not. But yeah, I think it's an influence on us all as organisers, and it's the kind of model we all want to follow. So,
Yeah, I think obviously it's one of the original. It's one that everyone knows, and I guess for you guys organising, it's kind of a bit of, like you say, that you're taking a spot of 2 people for every rider that takes part. So it's kind of like having an older brother. You've got to lead by example to the other events as well, and keep that spirit of what it's all about. And I guess that's a bit of, it really takes up quite a lot of your time, and you have to sort of, you have to showcase, because you're setting examples for other events as well, which is also something that we don't maybe have to deal with as much as you come down the ladder of events that are more newer events and slightly smaller.
Yeah, definitely.
Like,
feels like that.
Yeah, like the unsupported thing, the whole idea of like at what level do you put the unsupported thing in there? It's like, well, you've done Badlands, exactly. It's like, at what level can you say what's unsupported, what's supported? It's like, I think the philosophy of TCR is something that we've all taken on board, and I think that's the beauty of these events. Let's face it, it's a reference because of that.
I mean, we have our 10 rules on the race as well. So like 10 simple rules, the idea that they provide clear guidelines for anyone who's taking part in them. But I think like they guide a lot of the decisions that we make still. They like help the way we kind of adjudicate and organise those races. And I think like you said, Liam, like that kind of standard that we put the pressure on ourselves to still set to help others like find their way as well is kind of guided by a lot of that. So.
And Karen, you participated in such a epic ride. I mean, tell us from your perspective, what hooks you to participate on those events? What is encouraging people to get, and inspiring obviously, just going on that way of participating in an event which is completely different to what we all knew until quite recently?
Well, I mean, I think different things draw different people to those kind of events, but certainly for me it was, I'd kind of watched TCR from afar and thought, that just looks like an incredible experience where you know you're going to be tested on a daily basis in ways that you can't really foresee until you're there. I loved the idea of making that huge journey across a continent under your own steam, but doing it with other people, but not with other people. That kind of collective endeavour, even though you're very much obviously self-supported in doing it on your own and doing your own route. But yeah, it's the physical challenge, but also the kind of the mental challenge. And I've not met anyone who's done TCR or another similar event, whether they've completed it, whether they've scratched, whether they've been at the pointy end, whether they've finished kind of way after the final cut-off point. I think everyone's got huge amounts of kind of strength and really kind of, for a lot of people, life-changing experiences out of it. But in terms of how I actually ended up in the race, I applied thinking I wouldn't stand a chance in hell of getting a spot, and then to my horror was accepted. So it was kind of, if I had known I was going to get a place, I probably wouldn't have applied. It was just, yeah. I was just very, blissfully ignorant about what lay ahead of me. Yeah.
We're being ignorant of the values, because you mentioned about being responsible, the rules. How about the values of events like Transcontinental? What those values can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, when Mike set it up, the idea was that it was the opportunity for you to learn more about yourself through participating in events like this. So it's the chance to test yourself in a range of different settings, places, cultures, and you have to be able to span all of that, solve problems on a daily basis. So like, you can have a great plan, you can have a great route, that'll start to change quite quickly once you get out on the road. So like, how you respond and adapt and those things, like that's a value like that we really want to see come through. So like people's ability to overcome those things in their day-to-day life. I think as well there's something about like living in a much more kind of connected world, like online, being able to disconnect from that and really get back in touch with like nature and the natural environment and understand more about your surroundings, and like be very conscious of that as well. It's a really nice thing. It's like harking back to like a slightly simpler way of living for a short period of time, and that drives a lot of the things that we think about as well.
And apart from that, obviously, the more and more people get encouraged or inspired by participating, at some point we talk about limitation, but also during the event itself, more and more, because I think Badlands is here, and I think it happened the first year, but this year there's a lot of media around as well. A lot of riders that bring their own media to obviously communicate what they're doing. What are your thoughts? How was the future on that way? Because in my way, is it really being self-supported if you're bringing your own media to communicate it, or is not? How do you understand that?
Yeah, so we think really carefully about that. So we have a media license for our riders. So like if you're sponsored by a brand, you have to buy a media license. But what that actually does is allow you to talk about that brand while you're on the race, because essentially our race is a platform for that brand to have like exposure. We don't typically have riders who are followed by their own media team. Okay. So like that would be a very, very rare occurrence, and that would be something that has to be like negotiated with us in advance, but we will have our own media team on the race. So like our podcasters, our photographers, our race reporter will be at various points and will occasionally interact with the riders. But largely the idea is that you're capturing those stories as they pass through, but trying not to disrupt what their experience is like. So not holding them up if they're quickly trying to go and get their brevet card stamped and get out there. That's not the time to be like going for that really in-depth interview or something. But yeah, we try and make it as inobtrusive as possible. Although James Robertson, one of our photographers, has been known to follow people into bathrooms and photograph them when they haven't got a lot on. So there's a level of intrusion that I think comes with the race as well.
Well, I mean, Liam, you did Badlands in Paris this year, and your colleague, your mate, he was filming himself. Because I was remember chatting with you guys before this, the day before, and actually chatting about what camera gear where you bring it to document it, and Lawrence, he brought his drone, as I understand, and anyway, how you see that difference between in towards being closer to the spirit of the event itself? Just say, well, if I have to communicate this, which way should I do it? You know, how, because you experienced it this year, especially riding with someone who's actually documenting itself.
Yeah, I guess if you bringing your own equipment, I guess on the TCR, that's not something you discourage people bringing there. No, yeah, I guess if you're bringing it, you're carrying it, by your own steam, like you're saying, same way you're moving yourself forward. So doing it that way is definitely, you're trying to communicate what you're experiencing with others, which I think is a good thing. And yeah, carrying a drone, and the more equipment you bring, the better you can do that. So I know you took a camera also. I'm not sure if you took a super big one. You don't want to weigh yourself down.
Not as big as I wanted, but I couldn't, as you once said.
Yeah, we both did the Badlands earlier this year in pairs, and yeah, being able to have those. I mean, it's for yourself as well. If you can capture it and then look back at it, you have those good memories, and then it can inspire you to do the next trip or go back and do the same race again, and also share that experience with other people in the best way you can do. So having a drone or a camera, or film cameras or whatever you want, it's a pretty nice thing, I think.
But I agree with him. It's like, I think there is a question to be had. It's like, how do you do this? It's like, I think we're living in a society now. It's like, obviously social media is something that we're all part of. You want to document things, we're all taking photos, it's like, it's something, but documenting yourself. But like you said, when you have media crews, I did it the year before, and I had a media crew with me, but it does change the challenge, it does change the concept, because you have somebody there with you. So it's a difficult balance, because obviously brands, want to join into the ultra event scene, and there's always going to be that challenge, right? So
it's not just if you have a media group following one rider, it's not just that rider's experience or race they're impacting. They're also impacting every other rider in the field, because especially if it's off-road, it's narrow. We're going there because it's remote, and the more cars which are there during the event, which wouldn't otherwise be, is having an impact. So it's definitely a bit of a grey area, a bit of a touchy subject.
Yeah, as an organizer, it's something that you think about, and I think it's something that we're kind of finding this out. It's like you can have rules and whatever, but I think every year we learn, and I think finally, it's like the world that we're documenting. Obviously, the technology is there now. You can take a camera, even the mobiles these days. I mean, the photos are incredible, So yeah, it's just about finding that happy balance, I think,
Well, what is definitely true is that clearly we have this issue now because it just has become so popular. What were you expecting growing so quick? I mean, it's not even 10 years old, and the event, and more people. How were you expecting that growth in such a short amount of time?
Honestly, I think it's been a pleasant surprise. I think it's given us hope that we can do other types of adventures as well. So we run another race called the Trans-Pyrenees, which is from one side of the Pyrenees and back again. So one for the grid players for sure. But the fact that TCR has been like such sustained levels of interest for such an extended period of time now, I think gives me hope that there's a really sustainable future ahead. It's not just like people are really excited in this moment. It's not like zeitgeist, it's more long term than that. So yeah, it's been a surprise, but a good one.
And so people to understand are these events that anyone can sign up for?
Yeah.
Apply for. Sign up, apply for.
Yeah. So we run an application process which has a few different parts. So there'll be something which allows people to talk about their experience. So like, what other races have you done, or like what touring have you done, like what have you learned. There'll be some stuff around route planning as well. So like, given the fact we have the 5 control points on the race, but the rest of it is a free route, we want to make sure that people like understand how that works, the mechanics of that. And then some mechanical questions, so like, if this specific thing went wrong on your ride, how would you respond to that? What would you think about in terms of trying to fix it, to get a sense of people's problem solving as well. So there is an application process, but like, you need to like be able to think across those few different fields for us to have confidence that if you come and take on the race, that you'll be okay.
It's important. And what another question I keep thinking about is, the more I see stage races, and before we had it on stage as well, with O'Connor, Hannah Henson, Carlos Verona, we're talking about all this busy calendar, demanding calendar, and I want, when we presented this talk today, I said Epic Ride is the future of cycling, and why is the future of cycling? And we have to understand that is self-supported event, you know, like that you don't need so much infrastructure around. I mean, in the context of the world we're living now, do you think really that in the near future we might see more and more events like that, and maybe less of the classic cycling with, I don't know, 2 cars following a bunch of cyclists with 2 DSs? And I don't know, I'm just thinking a bit too far maybe. But what do you think about that? Do you think that might lead, you know, your events might lead into what in the future everyone will be interested on?
Sure, this will have perspective.
I think, you know, it's like the time trial. It's the race of truth. You're against the clock, and essentially an ultra distance race is just, you know, an evolution of that. You've got to start, you've got to finish. You're on your own, and you're racing against yourself as well as other people. And with that comes the experience, you know, and there's less infrastructure, which ultimately makes it more accessible as well. So it's definitely something that I think will.
I think, again, you said earlier, connections. I think the whole thing of connecting with the environment is something that, I mean, I come from the professional world as well, you know. I mean, you're the same, you travel around the world, you do races, you get out of the car, go to a hotel, and basically you're looking at Lycra bombs most of the time, or wheels, and you don't have any connection with the environment. You know, it's like, you have your profiles and that's it. But this is something completely different. You have like, you sit on that bike and you say, well, you know, I've got maybe 5 days here in terms of transcontinental, could be a month almost, you know. It's like, wow, that's amazing. And you're on the, you know, you're with yourself, your body, the environment. Sometimes you meet other people. It's just connections. I think it's something that takes cycling to a different level for a lot of people, you know. I think, and the accessibility is, you know, brings it down for everybody. Anybody can do this. We talked about this yesterday, no? It's like bikepacking for some, it's a race for some people it's for an experience, you know. So I think that's the beauty of this type of cycling. Whether it replaces professional cycling, I'm not so sure about. But I think mass participation, I think it's certainly something that it's attractive. It's attractive, definitely.
I also think definitely I can see loads more scope for ultra racing to grow in terms of kind of grassroots and everyday people just going out to test themselves. But I think there's also that kind of creeping professionalisation or semi-professionalisation of it, or at least I think even just in the last 5 years, the amount of kind of knowledge that people have in terms of how to prepare for those races mentally, physically, how to recover from them, because I think your body goes through so much physical transformation over the course of an ultra race, and I think we're kind of catching up in terms of how we understand that and research into kind of what, you know, what are the processes going on in people's bodies and how do they recover from it. So I think there's also a lot of scope for, I guess, increasingly kind of scientific type approaches to ultra racing. I mean, that said, we were talking about it earlier before we came on stage. Actually, the physicality of ultra racing is a relatively small proportion of everything that goes into a successful race. It's kind of how you handle it when stuff goes wrong and how good or bad your route is and so on.
Yeah, talking about like the control, I was like, I mean, you do a race, 200 kilometer stages and a tour or whatever, there's an element of control because you train that and it's kind of a closed environment. But in ultra riding, that is a part, but there's so many other things can happen on the way.
And they do happen.
Absolutely. And your experience changes every time you do an event like this. I mean, the experience is always different. I mean, you know, you can be lucky and not have any punctures, which, you know, changes the ball game completely. But I mean, if you have a series of mechanicals, psychologically, that changes a lot of things. How you you're facing the rest of the what you're doing or whatever. So yeah, it's an interesting concept to experiment with.
and Liam, because obviously they're not competitive events, right? But how they do turn competitive? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I guess for a lot of these events, they are races, but not everyone necessarily goes there to race. Sometimes the challenge, depending on the level of the event, the challenge can be just finishing. And as I've experienced, sometimes that's not always that easy, even just to do that. So yeah, that's another great area of accessibility, because you can go there to compete for a top position, but you can also go there for the experience and the challenge of to finish the route and do everything to go through everything that comes with that. And like you were just saying, anything can happen. So those challenges aren't something that you can necessarily prepare for either. So you've got to be really open-minded and just ready for whatever the route can throw at you, basically.
Yeah, and I think the participation thing's important as well. That's something we feel in Badlands. Certainly Badlands, in its first edition, to have Lack and Morton there for a lot of people. And you this year, it's like, and you experienced it yourself. When I start riding, people were like, quick selfie, please, quick selfie. It's like, but I think that participation for a lot of the cyclists, that's really important, to share that with their stars, to share that with that kind of spectrum. It's something that this space in cycling is really good. I think it's something that's why we're here talking about it. I think it's opened a whole new world to the cycling industry, basically.
And I'm interested as well, because Karen mentioned something super interesting. It was like, it does change people's life at some point. And for you organisers, I mean, what has been the most powerful feedback you had from a participant? I imagine it must be very emotional.
Oh, it's really emotionally charged, yeah. Like, you get it during the race, and particularly after, when you've reached that depth of exhaustion, when you get to the finish line after whatever it is, 11 days, 14 days, 16 days, and you're thinking about that journey that you've been on, the appreciation that people have, I think, for that experience that they've had is incredible. And I think there's something about it being, you're part of a bigger community, but you've had a very individual experience, but then you get to reconnect with that community at the end and share that. And I think the stories that come out of that are always really, really touching as well. You see people who've learned more about themselves in 2 weeks than they probably would have done in 20 years in their normal life, because they've traversed an entire continent. They've had to bridge context, cultural and language barriers when they're doing that, and find new ways of solving problems. I think it's almost universally something people come out the other side of it with a much richer appreciation for who they are and what they're capable of. So it's a nice thing.
Definitely are. It definitely is, and I hope all of you are inspired as well. And I'd just like to share one experience of my one and only ultra distance event I did this year, just to finish with this talk today. And when I finished Badlands, I did say if I had to pick up one ride of my life, just one, it would by now that would be this one. And I still think about it. And don't know whether it'll be another one, but they're amazing. They're amazing. Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.